everyone. Welcome to Assessment 101. I'm Eric Tao. In this very brief 20 minutes orientation, you will learn what is assessment, why assessment is so important for your class, for our student, and for the university. You will get to know and also describe what is the assessment cycle, why this is important at the end to close the loop to continue to improve our teaching and learning. In this process, you also will learn and able to change your syllabus to include the well-written learning outcomes. The learning outcome is well-written, it facilitates assessment, it make your class and our education better. So the first thing I always want to emphasize is why. Why do we do assessment? Or the longer name is learning outcome assessment. So why do we do it? Of course, the number one, and really the goal is to use this process to enhance student learning and make sure students are successful. Okay, this is really the goal. In detail, why are we doing learning outcome assessment? The question we want to answer is this: are we teaching what we think we should teach? Often, the class will have a set of goals and set of learning outcomes. But if we look at the detail of instruction, we are not teaching directly or very effectively to the learning outcome we are teaching. So number one, we want to answer is, are we teaching what we're supposed to teach? Second, we want to verify, are students learning? Do we have evidence? How do we collect evidence? So number two, why are we doing the learning outcome assessment? Is want to make sure the student are indeed learning what we asked them to learn. And to finish, why do we do this? Is to make sure we continuously improve teaching and learning so we can become a better university and we become a better institution for student success. And of course, the major why is that we want to continue to be outstanding so we can continue to get accredited. One is, what is assessment? Assessment is a collaborative, intentional, and iterative process of gathering and analyzing information to improve student learning. So that's the kind of the formal definition. So they are a course level assessment, meaning we look at the course outcome and we look at how we teach the students, and how do we assess them, meaning collect evidence of their learning. Do we do quizzes? Do we do discussion? Do we do project? Do we do final exam? Do we ask them to demonstrate their skills? Do we do survey? Okay. In that process, we want to improve our course, make sure the course teaches what we intend the course to do, and also students are learning with evidence that they are learning in the class. The program level is the next step. So when the student graduate from our program, we have a set of expected learning outcome. Are they achieving it? Do we have evidence? If they are not achieving those, what's wrong? How can we improve it? So when the student finish the program, we want them to demonstrate certain capability, certain belief, certain behavior, and that is the program level assessment. And of course, the institutional level. Are we providing the best education overall? Do we provide a good student services? Do we have a good orientation, registration, student activity, graduation process? And then more importantly, how are our graduates doing in their career? So that's institutional level. So assessment cover the courses, which is probably most important to you. Then there are program level that's important to the program director or deans. And of course, the institutional level, that's a concern of the whole school. So when do we do the assessment? The answer is all the time. All the time. What does that mean? That means during your instruction in your classroom activity, you should continue to watch the student, observe the student through quizzes, through interaction, to make sure the students are indeed learning what you are trying to teach them, and make sure that students are engaging and they also produce some evidence that we can say, yes, indeed, the students are learning the intended learning outcome. And there's a summative assessment. When do we do that? Usually we do it at the end of the course. Some faculty use finals, some faculty use project, some faculty use collaborative projects. But at the end of the course, we want to observe student behavior, student knowledge, and assess, have they achieved the learning outcome with evidence. And of course, at the end of the program, we usually give a comprehensive test to see, are they really learn all they need to learn and ready to take on their career, or take a comprehensive test at the end of the program. So who should do it? The answer is everyone should do it. Of course, faculty want to make sure every class fulfill the learning outcome stated in the course description. This is crucial to have the integrity of our whole program. Every class, every student in your classroom need to make sure they achieve the learning outcomes with assessment by evidence collected. Again, the evidence could be quizzes, could be observation, could be assignments, could be final, could be project. And of course, the advisor of the program need to assess the student behavior. Are they following their learning plan effectively? The dean want to make sure collectively, most of the students, if not all, are achieving both the set of learning outcome in the classroom in each course, and also the program learning outcome as a whole program. Then, of course, the vice president of academic affairs and the president should be involved in the outcome assessment, so they know how our students doing, what evidence we collect, and how do we use the evidence to continuously improve the instruction, improve the services, improve the entire learning experience of our student. So where do we do it? We do classroom observation, and we, of course, we have an outstanding learning management system called Moodle. A lot of quizzes and assignments and student project evidence are collected in the learning outcome, learning management system. Also, we can use that learning management to give student feedback and, of course, give them the grades. And the final grades and project, of course, we usually collect in the LMS or in your classroom. And at the end of the study, we do comprehensive exam. That's where we do another set of assessment. At the end, after they graduate, usually 6 months, a year, we do a survey that's also part of assessment to make sure the students are successful in passing the board exam or starting a successful career. How do we do it? We will use this assessment cycle to demonstrate how do we do assessment. It started with, at the top, let me show this. At the top, we have a set of learning outcome. Learning outcome should be revisited often. We describe the learning outcome really correctly? Do we specify the learning outcome clearly? Do we have a set of evidence that can demonstrate the student indeed achieved the learning outcome? Then we want to identify evidence. For example, something simple, it could be students should be able to describe this process. The way to do it, many faculty just use quizzes or exam. Or we will say students should demonstrate this behavior, then it's probably harder. We need to do survey or actually record their behavior in at the setting, for example, clinic. Okay, so every outcome should have some evidence that clearly show the student achieve or not achieve the outcomes. So this is the identified evidence. Then we collect data, the test result, the final exam. Then we look at how our student doing. Are most of them achieving the learning outcome by the evidence? If most of them pass, that's great. If many of them cannot have the evidence of achieving the learning outcome, then we really have to analyze it and find out how can we improve it. Then after we carefully analyze the data, talk to other faculty, talk to the dean, talk to associate dean, then we have an assessment report. The assessment report describes the courses, describe the learning outcome, describe what data we collect, and describe are we successful meeting all the outcome, and continue to look at the outcome and improve the overall process. So how do we do a successful assessment is through this 5-step, and this 5-step never ends. We always looking for a way to improve our instruction so the student have the best learning experience. Okay, now let's go into more detail about learning outcomes. So what are learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are descriptions of the specific knowledge, skill, expertise our student will get from your class or from our program. So important thing to remember is that the learning outcome are measurable achievement. The student will able to understand or demonstrate, which help the learner to learn better and learn why it's important in your class. So the learning outcome has to be written with in mind that geared towards the student. An important thing to know is that a well-written learning outcome will focus on the learner will apply the new knowledge or skill in real world, not just to recite or memorize information. The most useful learning outcome have to include a verb that describe observable action so we can collect evidence. So the learner will be able to understand what he or she need to do to achieve the learning outcomes. So when we are writing the learning outcome, there are 5 different types of learning outcome. The first one is intellectual skills. For example, the student need to understand concept, rule, or procedure. This is understand how to do something. The second one is cognitive strategy. How to use strategy to think, to organize, and learn how to behave. The third type is verbal. They able to describe, state, and say about the knowledge and skills. Number 4 is motor skills. What can they actually physically do and perform? A level of smoothness and proper timing. Those are motor skills, especially important for our student. Number 5 is attitude. How do you observe their behavior? How do you measure it? How do they change their thinking and behavior of learning about this learning outcome? So there are 5 types of learning outcomes. So many faculty are, including myself, are confused in the beginning, telling the difference between the learning objective and learning outcomes. They are similar, but they are not the same. Okay, for example, a learning objective for your class is that this class will explain new policy. Well, that's objective, but a learning outcome should be the learner is able to give example of when and how to apply new policy. That is a proper learning outcome, and that's how we should write it. Another example is that For learning objective, someone might say, this training activity will illustrate the 5 styles of effective communication in a clinic. This is from the perspective of the instructor. But a good learning outcome should be written like this. The learner can list and define styles of patient communication. So you can see this is from a learner's perspective and also focus on the action they can demonstrate. So let's go over some interesting learning outcome example. These are the good ones. We'll go through the bad one later. For example, learner will be able to identify the 100 herbs used in TCM, or the learner will be able to use the university's learning management system to effectively view course material and submit assignments. So you can see this is more precise, clarified, and also have an action. Learner will be able to describe the standard of treatments. The learner can follow clinic guidelines to create patient data online. Learner will be able to properly operate and clean the treatment rooms. So these are the good example of learning outcome. The bad one, you can see these are kind of vague. Okay, learner will learn the herbs using TCM. Learner will get familiar with university learning management system. Learner will be able to know about the standard. The learner will understand the guideline. We're able to use the treatment room. So these are too vague for learning outcomes. So how do we actually write it? I can tell you that this is very important. We all should look at our course and work with our dean to make sure our learning outcome in each course is follow these best practice. Well, first, always use the action verb. For example, student can demonstrate, can describe, can list, can negotiate, can treat, can classify, can draw. These are action verbs we should use in good learning outcomes. The learning outcomes should write clearly, should be able to easy to understand, not only for the faculty and for the deans, but also to the students. So they know how to achieve the outcome, be successful. Okay. The learning outcome should clearly indicate what learners should do within the discipline. The learning outcome should show expected level. Some outcome could be basic, just understand and memorize. Some outcome is a higher level, they can analyze or practice. A good learning outcome also can help with assessment. So this should be able to indicate clearly when the learner is successful achieving the outcome, what can they do? And also for each course, our recommendation is that do not have too many or too few learning outcomes. 5 to 7 learning outcome is considered the best practice. So can clearly identify them and explain it to the student. So after we decided the learning outcome, we provide the best instruction, we need to make sure we collect evidence. This is crucial. Without the evidence, we cannot move forward. Okay, so there are evidence that some of them are pretty straightforward. Course assignments, for example, research paper, project, or a final exam, or we can have learning portfolio, meaning the student collect all the quizzes, all the research, including maybe their own video presentation of the learning, and put together in the portfolio. We call it learning portfolio. We also can use comprehensive exam or thesis or dissertation as evidence. Of course, there's always a standardized test, right? It could be like the board exam, could be a common exam provided by the university. Or many programs will have a capstone project. That means student actually say treat patients with many cases. with a hands-on project to create a new process. So this is called a capstone. These are good direct measure of outcome evidence. And after we collect all the evidence, we need to analyze. So I'm not going to go to too much detail. This is the end result is that you look at the outcome. That's the kind of the goal of your course. Look at the student evidence they produce, quizzes, research, presentation, or practice with a video. Then we can classify them into quantitative or qualitative. So this is, we analyze the evidence, then we decide what to do with the result. Okay, the most important part, the whole process is so-called closing the loop. We start with a good set of learning outcomes, well-written, clear, and we, of course, provide the best instruction in our class, and we analyze the student evidence. Then what do? We look at the evidence, analyze them, and decide what's the next step. The next step is so-called closing the loop. That means improve our instruction. So if everything goes well, then that means all is well, then good, we finish our assessment. Not much need to be done. We just continue what we are doing. I can tell you, rarely we have the case. We usually have something we can tweak. So another possibility of closing the loop is the class is doing okay. We just need minor adjustment to our instruction or assessment to make our learning process better. Or we find out there are major problems. For example, most students couldn't do certain thing we want them to do in our class. Then we need major improvement. Maybe, I don't know, change the textbook, use a very different methodology, or consulting other faculty or experts to do major changes. That could be another way to close the loop. And another thing sometimes what happens is that we find out the learning outcome is just not properly designed. Maybe it's too vague, maybe it's not connected to the program goal, maybe it's not following the standard. So one possible way to close the loop is to revise the learning outcome. Okay? So that's assessment 101, very brief. I want you to understand assessment is important for your instruction, for the university to continue to improve the student learning, and to, of course, continue our accreditation. And it is also part of us being an educator. We're always looking way to help students to learn better, help us to become a better teacher. So my definition of the assessment is continuous improvement of learning with evidence. If you keep that in mind, then our assessment process will be great, and we can continue to give our students the best education they deserve. Thank you for viewing. This is my email. I'm passionate about our education. You can contact me, and there are many, many ways to learn assessment. It probably takes a whole week of training to do everything in detail well, but this is the very, very beginning, and just want you to know the basic process, why do we do it, and how do we use assessment to make our university a better place.